A Waste of Talent, a Mega Man X fanfiction with an original character by Kessie-Louise. Chapter 1. A human like her should have been a school teacher. She was far too bubbly, too young, too human to be in Maverick Hunter HQ. Techno watched with a clenched jaw as his brother shook hands with the human teenager. "It's going to be a pleasure working with you, Aero," Mitty happily said to her. "Dr. Kane has spoken a lot about you around here." "Mostly exaggerations," she replied with a wry smile. "Maybe a few," Mitty agreed with a grin of his own. "But don't discredit yourself. I was able to look over some of your school records, and you're pretty smart. You were in the top 50 percentile last quarter. That must have taken a lot of hard work." Techno rolled his eyes. It wasn't as much as a feat as Mitty was making it out to be. That just meant Aero was average at best. At worst, it meant she knew how to study. Or cram. "This is my brother Techno," Mitty then said, gesturing to him. "He's usually assigned to the cybersecurity sector, but most of the time we're able to work together in programming research." "Pleasure to meet you, Techno." Aero nodded as she extended her hand. Techno looked at it with a sneer. Didn't female humans paint their nails? Hers were absolutely bare, with a few instances of a hangnail or two. At least it didn't look like she was a nail-biter. That must have accounted for something. "Likewise," Techno finally said, taking her hand. It was a small shake, but it made its point. When they had pulled away, Aero immediately put her hands behind her back. She offered a small smile as a measure of goodwill. Techno remained neutral. "I can't wait to get started," Mitty said with a clap of his hands. "By the time we're done, Aero, every up-and-coming scientist is going to want you as their assistant. I bet Dr. Kane's already started the matchmaking. Haha." Aero gave a soft snort. "Yeah, I wouldn't doubt that either," she agreed. Techno made the decision to remain silent. It was no surprise around Maverick Hunter HQ that Dr. Kane was doing all he could to put his name back in good graces after Sigma's rebellion. Aero wasn't the only Hail Mary Kane was trying to pull off, but it was certainly one of the more obvious ones. Mitty took Aero by the hand to lead her to the main programming room. The teen had to bend forward a bit, considering both Mitty and Techno were a good head smaller than her. It was rather demeaning in its own way. Aero was rather short for a human her age. The fact that they didn't stand much higher than a 10-year-old allowed Techno to keep a displeasured grimace. They were going to outlive her one day, and what did they have to show for it? A smaller stature, apparently. Definitely insulting. The programming room only had one terminal for inputting information. The rest of the room was outfitted with rows and rows of servers. As sophisticated as Reploids were, you'd think that it would have led to greater developments for government-scale tech. Unfortunately, while the AI might have been grander, it was the other software that lagged just a bit behind. No one said getting the right funding was never easy anyway. "We'll work at the main terminal today," Mitty told Aero. "I'll get you a chair. I'm sure I had one around here that was tall enough. Ah! There it is!" Techno hung back by the door. There wasn't really a reason for him to stay around. He had more than enough work to go through on his own time. But some part of him refused to leave Mitty alone with a human. Was it mistrust? Prejudice? Either way, there was no convincing him to go away. Not that Mitty or Aero did so. If anything, they had forgotten he was still there. "The computer needs a passcode?" "Oh," Mitty declared. "Wait a minute now." The Reploid quickly moved to place his hand on a small crevice in the terminal. It took a moment or two for a small beep to confirm the signature. Mitty looked to Aero to explain. "It uses our RDNA as a security measure. Just a small scan with the timestamp. It's a little inconvenient for our purposes, but I hope you understand that it has to be like that." Aero nodded to show she understood. After that, Mitty went on to explain how the terminal worked and some basic controls for it. It seemed that Aero was a relatively quick learner. She was able to make her first command after about 30 minutes of instruction. Techno couldn't help but flinch each time Mitty congratulated her. He might as well have been talking to a toddler. "Now that we're all settled in," Mitty said, "here comes the more boring part, getting to work. Do you mind talking a bit while we look over the code? Sometimes it helps to figure things out, you know." "I don't mind," Aero agreed. "I assume you want to know how I'm related to Kane or how I know X." Was it that obvious? Mitty nervously asked. Aero gave a small shake of her head. No, it's just that it's always what people ask when they find out. Then let's start with Dr. Kane first, if you don't mind. You two are cousins, right? Once removed. His father was my maternal grandmother's sister. Beside my paternal grandmother, he's the only family I have left. Oh, that's so sad, Mitty empathized. The sadness in his voice almost made Techno gag. At least he's been supportive? Yeah, she snorted. That was never in doubt. But that meant you got to know X when he was first activated, right? Before the rest of us replicates came along. He must have been a different person back then. Something like that. Mitty looked at Aero with a twinkle in his eye. I bet you two got along pretty well. You would have been about the same age when he was activated. Dr. Kane must have really supported your relationship back then, too. Aero immediately flinched. Techno raised an eyebrow at it. Want to know a secret? Mitty then prodded as he scooted a bit closer to Aero. When the X-Hunters were still at large, you were the first person X made sure was safe from their plotting. Dr. Kane, too, of course. But you were the one closest on his mind. You could see it in his eyes when we did the daily check-in. Can we talk about something else? Aero requested. Her voice was low, just shy of being nothing more of a squeak. Of course, Mitty happily agreed. I just wanted to let you know, just in case. X has a lot of respect for you, and I'm starting to see why. What else could we talk about then? Oh, how about that new TV show everyone's talking about? I've seen the first few episodes, but Techno won't watch them with me. He says that it's frustrating watching humans fail to communicate with each other, but I think it makes it more interesting. The only noise in the programming room was the low hum of the servers. Mitty and Aero had finished their first day together hours ago. Arrangements to meet up around the same time the next day was agreed to, and they departed on rather good terms. Now at this late hour, the only people still working at Maverick Hunter HQ were the first responders and a few essential staff. This meant that Techno was able to enter the programming room without so much as a second glance. He walked over to the main terminal and smirked a bit at the passcode entry screen. Cracking his knuckles, his fingers flew over the inputs to place the terminal into developer override. His job got harder from there, though. The Maverick Hunters were really starting to up their digital security. If it got any more sophisticated, he'd have to connect his CPU just to make any kind of dent in the code. All the world help him if someone destroyed the terminal if he connected to it that way. He'd be a goner in minutes. But that wasn't going to happen today. He got through the barriers and was able to read through what work Mitty and Aero had gotten through. They had already sent their rough copy to the higher-up, but that didn't mean it couldn't stand a few tweaks. That particular superior always left work early. Any work sent in late wouldn't be reviewed until the next morning. Techno had the perfect opportunity to adjust things. First, he read over the file in order to distinguish just what Aero wrote from what Mitty had. He cursed when he found that some of it was nearly identical. Apparently, Aero really was a fast imitative learner. It took its second pass for him to see the beginner mistakes, the niche changes of language in each line. With all luck, he'd have that human out of here by the end of the week. The Maverick Hunters didn't take too kindly to irrelevant data in their files. Depending on the context, it was even a serious offense. Now the hardest part of his job. What did stupid human teenagers usually rant about? Chapter 2. Neither of them knew what the next day had in store. Mitty had met Aero personally at the reception desk and almost took her hand again as they went back to the programming room. There wasn't a delay for their next task. Today we're going to build off what we worked on yesterday, Mitty happily explained. But this time we're going to add digital signatures and timestamps. Hopefully by the end of the day, you'll be able to add certificates as well for extra authorization. Aero gave him a firm nod. Let's get to it, she agreed. Mitty grinned from ear to ear. That was exactly what he wanted to hear. The two became so engrossed in their work that they didn't hear the door open. It was Mitty who caught movement out of the corner of his eye, and when he turned to see who it was, he gave another wide grin. His first assumption at seeing the blue B-class hunter had nothing to do with work. If anything, most logical explanations were centered around Aero. Hey there, Mitty greeted. What brings you to our little division? I was asked to come investigate in a certain matter. It shouldn't take too long, since I doubt you would. Hearing X's voice made Aero pause what she was doing and turn around. She greeted him with a wide grin. "Hey, stranger," she said. "How's it going?" A light blush found its way onto X's face. Her sincerity in meeting him made him feel bad for what he was about to tell them. However, it left no doubt to him that they weren't involved. But he wouldn't lose his professionalism. This was a serious matter. "I've been sent by head of data research and management in regards to the work you sent yesterday," he told them. Mitty, he noticed, immediately looked taken aback by this. His fellow hunter knew what it meant when the head of a certain division sent someone in their stead. Aero did not. She instead asked X, "Why'd they send you? You're primed for field recon and defense, not data management." For this, X gave a sheepish laugh as he rubbed the back of his neck. "I'm technically on auxiliary duties until they find me an operating unit," he admitted. "I wouldn't mind just being in R&D for a while, though." He shook his head. This wasn't the time to start rambling off to her. Definitely not when another Maverick hunter was standing right there. "There's a problem with the data you sent over last night," he told them. "It was incredibly unprofessional and held a heavy bias toward, well, me." The look of disbelief was near equal on Mitty and Aero's face. "But I sent the data over the same way I always did," Mitty said. "We worked on it together." "Not according to research and management." Knowing that this moment would come, and dreading it even more now, X pulled out a holographic tablet. It was already on, and the faintest of the report could be read from where he was. He didn't hand the tablet to Mitty. Instead, he handed it over to Aero. The human immediately raised an eyebrow at this choice. Carefully, Aero read over the revisions. The further she went along, the more her face contorted into one of near fury. "I didn't write this," she shot a cold look at X. "I wouldn't write this." "I know," he quietly admitted while refusing to look at her. "This is all my fault," Mitty told them. "Don't even say that, Mitty," Aero immediately argued, slamming the tablet onto the terminal. Its edges made a hard clunk sound upon impact. "But it's true! I didn't recheck the data we sent last night because I was too excited. If I had, we wouldn't be in this situation. You wouldn't be in this situation." X recoiled slightly at this. "So what you sent over was different?" he asked. "Yes!" they both agreed. "The original copy is still here," Mitty then went on to tell him. "See, look. If it was that distorted, we wouldn't have been able to make a dent today." X obeyed the suggestion. He followed Mitty to let him look over what they had done today and what they accomplished yesterday. A part of him was amazed to admit it, but X wasn't even able to tell where Mitty's work ended and Aero's started, and vice versa. It was only when he got to today's work that he could piece together the differences. "We should send this while the head of data research and management is still here," he said as he continued to look through the data. "It might satisfy the higher-ups enough to give a grace period." "That's a wonderful idea," Mitty agreed with an eager nod. "I just hope they don't call for a full operation supervision." "Me too," X carefully nodded. "I still don't see how the two versions ended up different. Maybe once we give it to the manager, the data frequency got warped with something else. You know how those navigators always writing their diaries in our personal servers. They must have merged at some point. If that's the case, then it's a major breach in the frequency. Other divisions would have had similar claims, too." "Yeah, well, it's the only thing I can really think of at the moment. Maybe we should try to encode it differently tonight." "Yeah, that sounds like a good idea." As Mitty started to prepare the procedure to change the data's encoding, X took a look over at Aero. She had started reading through the edited work a bit closer now. Her mouth silently repeated the words she was reading off the screen. Each one looked like it was making her even more furious. X wished he could pull her aside and personally talk it over. Then again, it was mostly because they hadn't spent a lot of time together since he formally joined the Maverick Hunters. He missed having lazy afternoons with her, doing nothing more than making idle conversations. He missed her laugh. Aero jumped when X placed a hand on her shoulder. Her dark brown eyes met his gentle green ones in an instant. A part of her immediately broke then. She tried to open her mouth to tell him something, but kept thinking better of it. Then, without much warning, She bonked her head against his chest armor, closed her eyes, and sighed. She was an absolute trooper about the whole thing, Techno. Mitty later told his brother. I don't know who would try to make her look bad. She's such a sweet person and very eager to learn. Isn't it obvious? His brother asked with a callous shrug. Humans don't belong in the Maverick Hunters. Mitty gasped. How could you say that? It was founded by a human. And Sigma. Mitty opened his mouth to refute it, but found that he couldn't. Techno patiently waited for him to stop looking like a fish so he could explain his thoughts more. Fact of the matter is, ever since the Maverick War, we can't trust anyone. And of anyone, it shouldn't be the apparently super smart human that has more connections than a spider web. The Maverick Hunters were made for Reploids to protect everyone. Reploids. There isn't a place here for a squishy little human like her. Mitty legitimately looked appalled at this. Of course there is, he finally shot back once the words came to him. Training here would be a great jumping point. We could direct her to someone who has the additional security to keep her safe. Doppler, or Gate, or Godil, anyone. Dr. Kane is right about keeping a human near the Maverick Hunter still. We need that additional insight we Reploids probably wouldn't think of. Yes, humans have a hard time trusting Reploids because of the war, and maybe even vice versa. But plenty are still able to work together. Just look at X and Aero. You can almost feel the trust coming off of. If X went Maverick, do you think he'd hesitate before killing her? Techno watched as his brother completely froze. You almost would have assumed the small Reploid had gone offline. A still silence came between them like a heavy fog. If X went Maverick, Techno repeated, this time in a much lower, darker voice. Do you think Aero would be there at the front lines, directing the resistance on just where and how to give the final blow? It was a good thing Reploids didn't really need air to breathe, otherwise Mitty might have fainted by now. Consider this then, Techno challenged. When Zero first woke up, before he helped X end the Maverick War, do you remember how they said he was? Zero was feral. He was the Maverick virus personified. Some say that if he was never found, we never would have had the Maverick War. Now that Zero no longer remembers his awakening, he's one of the Maverick Hunter's top warriors. X trusts Zero, with his life in fact, but Aero doesn't. What does that mean for the divide between us when the two who trust each other the most can't share the same trust in a mutual Reploid? Technically, Mitty softly mused, Zero is the one that distrusts her. Mostly because her and X are close, and Zero wants him to focus on becoming an S-class hunter. Mitty, you know that's not my point. Mitty deflated a little. I know, he admitted. But, Techno, watching Aero learn, and even taking steps to correct something on her own, it's like hope. A hope I didn't know went missing during the Maverick War. I know other people are already working on a cure for the Maverick virus, but I want her to be there too. She should be there too. Maybe Dr. Kane is right to use her as a Hail Mary to rekindle the relationship between humans and Reploids. We need humans like her now. We just do. Can't you see it too? For a long time, the two just stared at each other. Now would have been the time Techno would have forgotten how to breathe. There were many more counterpoints and roundabouts they can discuss on this. It was why true peace couldn't exist. There were still too many variables, too many similar arguments, for anyone to really get anywhere. I'm going to be home late, Techno finally said. Don't wait up for me. The best Mitty could do to respond was to give a small nod. So Mitty wasn't just talking fluff when he said Aero had tried to correct a piece of data on her own. The amateur language was sitting right there in front of Techno. In the long term, this bit of data wouldn't mean much. In the moment, it was more or less basic optimization. There was nothing here to grant a reward over. Hope, huh? Techno huffed. Humans don't live long enough to carry real hope. Not a chance. And yet, he hesitated as he went to wipe those lines. Techno gave himself a condescending tisk before going forward with it anyway. A new sort of fury came over him as he replaced it with anything Zero would find embarrassing. Aero needed to go. If Mitty, X, or even the Maverick Hunters at whole weren't going to shove her out, Zero would. Techno would almost bet on it. Chapter 3. It was always hard to tell if Zero chose to be annoyed or if he just woke up that way. Today was a different matter altogether. The news brought back the instinct to kill with the force of a tidal wave. The edge of his sight was as red as his armor as he stormed to the programming room. There was always something to hate about her, and this pushed that over the cliff. There was no knocking on the door before he entered. He barely even gave them time to know he was there. "Aero, Lily, and Zephyra!" Zero screamed as he thundered through the room. He forced her seat to turn around so quickly that she nearly fell out of it. It was a short miracle that the chair didn't break right then and there. Bewildered at first, Aero's face changed into a more neutral look when she saw Zero was there. "Hello," she greeted with a toneless voice. Zero gripped the chair tighter. "You!" Aero blinked. "Me," she agreed. "Are we going to have an actual conversation today, or are you just going to act like a zombie? It's a shame X managed to get your voice module back from the X Hunters." "Don't act like you don't know," Zero demanded as he gave the chair a hard shake. "If we weren't in Maverick Hunter HQ, What would you do?" Aero challenged as she got up. At full height, Zero was a good head taller than her. It was like watching a little sister stand up to her football player of a brother. "If this is about the data Minnie and I were working on, I'd like you to know that someone has been keen on sabotaging it. I assume you didn't get that memo?" "I don't care who wrote it. All that information is false and incredibly derogatory. I assume you didn't get that memo?" "Of course. I already got that spiel this morning. One more strike and they're kicking me out." "If it were up to me, you would have packed up and left before this was ever a problem." Aero scoffed, pairing it with a neat roll of her eyes. "Right," she even mused. "Because me being here is distracting the X, right? He can't exercise that little bit of human in him because he's going to be a big shot S-class hunter someday, right? We can't have silly human emotions like a Oh, wait, that's what Reploids are, aren't they? Human emotions in a strong robotic body. Weird how they're not allowed to show it." Zero's fists clenched. He was so close to punching her. The Reploid that was teaching her was gone now. When he left, Zero hadn't been paying attention. So what was stopping him? A good swing to her left temple would take her out for a few hours. Maybe a day or two. There wouldn't even be that much blood either, depending on the angle. "Besides," Aero callously said as she carefully made more distance between him and her, "I thought it was pretty clever, actually. That string of intimacy that overrode my original data was rather informative. I never would have guessed that brown-haired and green-eyed Reploids were your type. It's no wonder that you're so clingy with." "Shut it!" Zero demanded, lunging at Aero a second after. A genuine yelp escaped her lips in time with someone else shouting, "Zero!" before they got in between the two. Both had to take a moment of astonishment to see it was X. The blue bomber was facing the red legend with a look of fear and plea. Meanwhile, Mitty was carefully slipping back into the room looking quite nervous as well. He tried to move close to Aero in case they needed to leave quickly. "Zero, please listen to reason," X told his friend. "I know you're mad at Aero." "You think?" "But someone is tampering with the data Aero is co-authoring." "Which is what I told him." "She isn't completely at fault. Just trust me on this. Please? Until we have other evidence at least." There was still a fire in Zero's eyes as he looked at X. After a few more moments, he finally broke. He looked away from his friend with a heavy sigh of defeat. "Fine," Zero grumbled. "Oh, sure, you listen to X." Aero then hissed under her breath. "Aero!" X snapped. It had a bit more force than what he had intended, but it got the point out. Aero made a gesture of zipping her lip almost immediately after. X let out a heavy sigh of his own before returning his attention to Zero. "One more day," he promised. "Just give them one more day." Zero didn't say anything. Instead, he turned on his heel and left. X watched him with a heavy heart. He turned to Aero, who Mitty had softly talking to make sure Zero hadn't heard her. They looked over when they realized he was staring. "One more day," he softly reminded them before leaving as well. It was kind of amazing how Maverick Hunter HQ's cafeteria wasn't one of its most deserted areas. Aero was the only human there, though. She absently swung her lunch bag back and forth as she found a place to sit. Finding a place to be alone wasn't that hard. It felt better to be alone anyway. What she didn't know was that Techno had followed her into the cafeteria. He waited until she had found a place to sit before taking one opposite. He didn't bother to give her any time for a greeting before saying, "Heard Zero tried to kill you this morning." "Yep," Aero nonchalantly agreed. "Usually he tries around sundown. It festers during the day, you see. So this was a pleasant surprise." "Guess it makes you hate old Reploids, huh, with the way he acts around you?" Aero made a funny face before disagreeing. "Nah, my relationship with Zero is a special kind of dysfunction. It was doomed from the start, in retrospect. I wouldn't hold his lack of emotion control against other Reploids. I wouldn't for a human. And trust me, I've met far more dangerous humans than Reploids so far." "More dangerous than Sigma?" Techno snorted. "That's impossible." "You apparently never learned about the centuries of war humans incited on each other before Reploids came along," Aero calmly replied. The near callousness of it made Techno recoil. Techno gave the human a good look over. At this point, she was carefully taking out her lunch items and not paying much attention to him. "Aero," he finally said, "I want you to change my mind about something." "Oh yeah? About what?" Techno sat a bit straighter before asking, "What do you think about Reploids?" That made Aero pause. She blinked for a moment before looking at him. "Over lunch? When else do we get to talk?" Aero snorted. She hadn't meant to, but the answer had been a bit too blunt. And true. After she and Mitty had finished these past 2 days, she'd head back out to reception for her grandmother to take her home. She really didn't stick around a brown nose in the hunter's business. She didn't have a reason to. And with that, she really started to go over what Techno had asked. "What do I think about Reploids?" she repeated. Her head tilted from side to side as she considered it. "Well, you might as well ask me what I think about humans. We're all supposed to be the same, right?" "But we're not." Aero reclined a bit. "Maybe not yet," she agreed in a thoughtful voice. "I think the Maverick virus needs to be near, if not completely, eradicated first. The only way Mavericks could come about would be because some poor sap got swindled by a bigger bad, like a cult. But it wouldn't happen for centuries, I think. Feels more realistic that way. It won't happen in our generation, but it will eventually. I can feel it." "So do you? We're already the same?" "In a way, yeah, I guess so." Techno stapled his fingers together as he thought this over. He supposed it made sense. It's not like that particular stance was too unique either. If it wasn't for overall shape, many humans would have assumed Reploids were just like them. But the implication that humans would one day be on par with Reploids as well? Is this the hope Mitty saw in Aero? "I understand now," Techno finally admitted. Aero looked to him with a curious tilt of her head. Before she could ask or wonder anything, Techno told her, "Aero, I'm the one who's been sabotaging your work." He expected an immediate reaction. He expected her to yell or gasp loud enough to bring all the attention in the cafeteria to them. Instead, Aero opened up her bottle of butterscotch-flavored milk and took a rather calm sip. Techno waited for her to finish as even more confusion filled him. "Why?" Aero then asked. "Why are you telling me this now?" "You're not mad?" was the dumbfounded answer back. For this, she only offered a half shrug. "Maybe I am, maybe I'm not," she said. "Would you have done it if I was a Reploid?" Techno's resulting flinch was as good as an answer to her. "If that's the case," she hummed, "I'd like to eat lunch alone. I'm sure there's more than one person you should be talking to than just me right now." "Right," Techno dimly agreed before getting up. The two did not look at each other for the rest of the day. He should have stayed silent about the whole thing. No one on the main board was pleased with this insubordination. They decided that he would be placed on probation for the next month or so, along with peer monitoring to make sure he didn't do it again. What was the name of the Reploid assigned to him now? Zane? Not that he would do it again. Techno had only wanted to make a point, and he had. It was also hard to tell just who the board was trying to cater to. There certainly weren't any apologies given to Aero over the ordeal, and Techno technically could have faced a more harsh punishment, even when he had pled guilty to it all. It was certainly enough to hush up any controversies before they got out into the public. Would anyone had even cared about a small infraction like that? Techno thought about it and decided that it wouldn't take much to stir up a group of people, Reploid or human, into a fight anymore, so perhaps it was for the best. Techno couldn't face Mitty during all this. His brother would give 1,000,001 reasons that he didn't have an answer for. So many others would simply be answered with, why not? Not that he could really avoid him forever. It was just easier to delay the inevitable. The Reploid made his way to the programming room where it all started. He sunk into the chair Aero was using with a heavy sigh. How pathetic. All the abilities to hack into whatever you desire, and you do it to bully a human. Techno jumped with a start. Who said that? He questioned as he wildly looked around the room. For all intents and purposes, he was alone. It was when Techno looked down at the terminal to find that it was far from the truth. You! He sputtered as he stared at the forming image. You're Sigma! The last thing Techno could remember properly was the echo of Sigma's menacing laugh, and the hope that no one would get hurt by what happened next.